This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Looking for expert support and a writing community? My Novel Journey coaching program is perfect for experienced novelists seeking mentorship and connection. Benefit from personalized guidance, detailed feedback, and a community that shares your passion for writing while getting the challenges writers face. Enhance your craft, achieve your writing goals, and confidently polish your novel. Join me now and take your writing to new heights. Go to wordessential.com/fiction coaching. This week, I've got a special episode of the Storyworks Roundtable for you, just in time for Halloween. I am joined by 4 fabulous authors of ghost stories. And this is, of course, in honor of Halloween, but it's also in honor of the relaunch of my book, Murder in Skog Hall, which is a ghost story and a murder mystery. So I thought, what better way to celebrate than to get together with some fellow spooky authors and talk about all things ghost story. As usual, we get into inspiration and craft and what kind of research goes into writing a paranormal story, what kind of rules you have to make for your characters and how they function in a world that bends reality, or maybe not, right? Kind of depends on your perspective there. So enjoy Gabi Coatsworth, Paulette Kennedy, Heidrich-Rice, Sandra Young, and myself talking about ghost stories. Make sure you listen to the very end because, of course, Halloween is a week away from this episode's release. And these authors have some really cool events going on right now or coming up. Some of them are virtual, some of them are live. So I'm sure you'll want to be able to attend whatever you can and, get your literary boo on. Before we play this conversation, I just want to make sure you know that I've got some writing craft workshops. These are live classrooms, virtual classrooms, but live workshops coming up in November and the very beginning of December. You can sign up for one or all 3 at wordessential.com/events. So you can get the workshop description, schedule, and enroll, get your ticket there at that page. You can also find November and December's free office hour. So that's your opportunity just to pop in, say hello, and chat craft. Bring me your story problems. I love to bounce ideas around and problem solve with my fellow writers. Those are totally free, but you do need to register. So go to wordessential.com/events. Sign up for the totally free office hour, check out the writing workshops, grab a ticket for those, and I will see you soon. Now, happy Halloween. Hello and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Today, Catherine is here in spirit. She was all set to take my seat and be the host of this special roundtable, but then her kids were sick and, of course, motherhood before podcasting. So, Catherine here in spirit and I are delighted to be joined by 4 fabulous authors to talk about all things spooky. We are all writers of mysteries or paranormal ghost stories, things that go bump in the night. And I will let each writer introduce herself so that you can start to associate the voice with the name, with the title right off the bat. So, Gabi, why don't you start?
Hello, thank you for having me. I may be the most recognizable voice because, of course, it's British, which is also the way I write with a British accent. But I'm the author of a book called A Beginner's Guide to Starting Over, which my granddaughter thought was a self-help book, but actually is about a woman, a widow who owns a bookstore and whose dead husband shows up to help her choose a replacement for him who's not quite as good but will do. So essentially that's my brief. It's my first novel and I'm working on the sequel now.
Excellent. Thank you. Paulette, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, I'm Paulette Kennedy, and I am an author of Gothic fiction. My most recent release is The Devil and Mrs. Davenport, which came out in March. And it is about a 1950s housewife who begins hearing the voices of the dead after a short viral illness. And this sets her at odds with her conservative Bible college professor husband.
Fun. Hey, Jan, you're up.
Thank you. I'm Jan Heidrich-Rice. My debut novel is Secrets of the Blue Moon, and it's a speculative fiction. It's been called everything from cozy to gothic, but basically it's a mystery with a ghost story intertwined. And it's about a young woman at a crossroads. Her marriage is rocky. She's having infertility issues. She's lost her job, and she, instead of dealing with it, surprise, surprise, runs from it and takes a temporary position in a small town where she battles her personal ghosts, but also encounters some real ones.
Thank you. Sandy, your turn.
Okay, I'm Sandra Young, and I write the Divine Vintage series. And my books, this series is wrapping romance around historical mysteries with a ghostly sizzle. So each of these books have a strong ghostly presence, ghost-seeking redemption, and vintage fashion plays strongly into my book series, which is why I, always have something to decorate behind me.
I love it. And my book, Murder in Skog Hall, is a ghost story murder mystery. Jess leaves her old life behind after a divorce to start over in a rural arts community on the Mississippi River. Only that charming farmhouse she found for such a bargain price turns out to be haunted. And if she wants to save her home, she's got to solve a 40-year-old murder mystery. So, sounds like we all like ghosts. Why ghosts? Let's start there. What attracted us to telling ghost stories?
Well, can I say something, which is that I never liked ghosts particularly. I mean, I could handle the Ghost and Mrs. Muir, a little sort of spooky romance, but I hate being frightened. And yet, when I published this book, I found that there were a whole lot of others, including Sandy and Paulette, who were producing and publishing books with a ghostly element, but generally a benign ghostly element in them. And it seems to be a wave, which I'm thrilled to be part of. But I'm not sure why it suddenly arrived. Mm-hmm. So if anybody else has got any ideas, go for it.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. But before we do, why did you personally write a ghost story, especially if you weren't attracted to ghosts before this?
Okay, so my husband died a few years ago, and people asked me, where did I think people went if I didn't believe in heaven? What happened to them? And my answer to these live queries was, well, I think people live on inside us and we talk to them in our heads. I've never, I met a lot of people that this happens to. And as I was writing this and the conversations were going on in my protagonist's head, suddenly, to my surprise, a guy showed up and in the kitchen, and there was no stopping it after that. Once I'd started with starts in a voice in the head, and then suddenly there he is. I just thought, okay, well, why not? It's just probably a metaphor of something, but it worked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How about the rest of you? Why ghosts?
I'm like Gabi. I actually, the concept of actually seeing a ghost, which when I was 8 years old, I saw my great grandmother long past in a chair at my grandparents' house, and was so scared that I dived under the cot that I was sleeping on. And maybe that set me off on the path, but someone said, "Oh, you must really, like ghosts," and I'm like, "No, like Gabi, I don't want to be scared. I don't like horror." And what I've come to realize, like I said, my ghosts are all seeking redemption. They are benign energy, spirits that are just trying to get something that has happened in the past in their lives. They want to right it. They're coming back to try to reach out to somebody in modern day to try to change a situation which they weren't happy with in their past. I think that concept just I like it. Yeah, I like that concept. But truly, if a ghost pops out, I am going to be screaming and running from this room.
Mm-hmm.
Paulette, you want to go or you want me?
I'll go. Yeah, I feel similar to Sandy. My ghosts are mostly benign, and I have to apologize. There's construction going on next door, so if you hear any banging on my side of the mic, that's where it's coming from, not ghosts. But mostly it's that I'm kind of fascinated by the supernatural, and I always have been. I grew up just a block away from a cemetery, and I would often go there and as a child and think about the lives of the people who were buried there. And there was kind of a little bit of a romantic feel for me with ghosts and anything Gothic. And my mom was a big fan of Gothic literature. So she was like introducing me to books like Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights, which have ghosts and such in them. And that's kind of where it started for me. And I just have always wondered that age old question, what happens to us after we die, and some of that energy I feel like has to continue in some form or another. So I think that's where the fascination for ghosts came from for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Paulette, I think you really captured a lot of what I feel. I drafted my book in fall 2020 during NaNoWriMo. And you might recall, actually, there was the presidential election, there was the pandemic, and there also was a blue moon on Halloween, which is very, very rare. It's like once every 19 years happens. But I think so many of those things came into play, and I think there were people dying, and I am now spring chicken, and I think I was really thinking, my gosh, what is going to happen? What and where will I go? And I have been raised in a Christian faith, and it's kind of ingrained in me. But I live in the South, and it's a very different faith comes in different flavors. I will just put it that way, and that's a little bit of an element in my book also. But I think what happens to us beyond there is an energy. I don't have the answers, but it just fascinates me, and I wanted to write a little bit darker, but there's this little sense of hope in me that just can't be buried. So that's why some people call it a cozy, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. Like I think, all touched on, I'm fascinated with ghosts and the paranormal. I always have been. Part of me really wants the experience, and the rest of me would be horrified, and I'm sure blocks any kind of psychic phenomenon from actually coming through. And when I set out to write Murder in Skok Hall, I just thought it would be really fun. I'd been working for a long time on historical fiction, which was very research intensive. And I thought, I'll write something I don't have to research. I'll just write a mystery, but it's not going to be like a police procedural or, anything. So the protagonist can be like me, and it's going to be a ghost story, because I think that would be really fun to write. And that started me down this path.
Alida, can I ask you something though? So is your ghost from the past? Yes, right? You're nodding. So I'm going to say, don't you have to research that? like you
Well-
do historical fiction.
So it's funny you bring that up. So Jess moves into the farmhouse. It's haunted by the woman who was killed there 40 years before. So it's only a 40-year gap. So I did, a little bit of checking timelines. The ghost period is before my time, but not so far back that it was like unfamiliar territory, record players and cars and like pretty normal stuff. So it was very research light. But then the second book, the murder happens in the present. And so now there's a sheriff involved. So then I was back to doing research because I had to understand how sheriffs work. Okay, since we're on research, is that something that factors into your ghost stories? And was it intentional? Did you set out, like the Divine Vintage series? I assume that's all historical. So lots of research, again, different eras.
I have dual timelines. Divine Vintage is 1913. So there was some, but not a ton, as you said, as it would be with a pure historical. But, from a paranormal angle, the cool thing I would actually like to have is Tess Burton, my protagonist. She has this ability to touch a vintage item and see, feel, have a very sensory image of the wearer's past. She can actually place herself in an instance. And I think that would be something that would be, for me, very cool, to take some beautiful dress and then just have this image of being in this wonderful ballroom dancing in it or something like that. So from a paranormal angle, rather than just the ghostly spookiness, that to me was a cool idea. And then her assistant turns out that, she develops her power to see auras because she's an artist. So I think I gave all my characters these abilities. The third one is actually sees and converses with ghosts. But I didn't research it, to be honest, because I think people in various ways, if they do have this extra sensory type of ability, it comes through in various ways. So who are we to say that someone wouldn't be able to have it in this specific way? There's not just one lane. So as far as sitting down and researching, I looked into auras and it's like, okay, this is what aura colors generally mean and that kind of thing. But otherwise, I kind of kept it an imagination based on the paranormal abilities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what about everyone else's protagonist paranormal abilities? And did you have to research it so you felt like you were being authentic with the psychics or whatever was happening?
I did a little bit of research on mediums and psychic abilities, different kinds of ways that psychic abilities can manifest. And with Loretta, who is clairaudient and also has the ability to actually channel spirits, I looked at a lot of different mediums and did a lot of different research with videos, watching them talk about their experiences and how they discovered that they had this ability. And of course, there are people that are more showman-esque, that have a little bit more of a bigger personality. And then there are people that are quieter mediums who really only do that kind of work when they're specifically called upon by friends or family. And so I wanted Loretta to be a quieter type of medium. And that is in line with her characterization. I think research in general for me, research is important because all of my books are historical. But the most important thing for me is getting to know my character really well and who my character is. And while the historical aspects of the novels I write are important, since it's fiction, I feel like readers need to have that bond with the main character more than anything. So I spend a great deal of time just getting to know who they are. And I have a journal and I'll journal 4 to 5 pages for my main characters before I ever start drafting. So I do research, but to me, research takes a little bit of a back seat to the story and to the character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I did so there's a paranormal investigation group here in the Twin Cities, and I went to a haunted hotel in Sauk Center, which is Sinclair Lewis's hometown, and he actually worked at the hotel when he was in high school and such, before he left Sauk Center. And reportedly, he is one of the ghosts or entities that is present
So cool.
in this haunted hotel. Yeah, so I went with this paranormal investigation group and stayed in the hotel and toured his childhood home, and it was a ton of fun. We did have like some group activities where, like cameras picked up orbs and you could see like flashlights flickering, but I didn't feel like I was psychic enough to see or feel anything with my own eyes, which was kind of a disappointment. I was really hoping to meet Sinclair Lewis and, be like, hey, want to help me write my next novel? I wouldn't mind. But yeah, it was fun research. And you're like, okay, that's professional work right there.
Don't you think that the fun I think that I was getting this from Paulette and Sandy, the fun about writing your own ghost is that you make up the rules for that ghost, but they have to be consistent. So it's like, when are they allowed to appear? How do they appear? Is there only one place they can appear? And like in my book, I had to keep the dead husband downstairs in case there were any shenanigans going on above stairs. I didn't want him to know about, and I had to make those up as I went along because my critique partners kept saying, so is he allowed to do this? And I'm like, I don't know. Well, maybe he is, like that. But that was fun to do. And it's different every time for those who've written more than one book, I guess, or at least have written different ghosts.
Oh, that's a great point. That's a great point, Gabi. I mean, in my third book, The Ghostly Diva, she comes back, Liza, and she is a sassy ghost, and she comes back as her younger self. She passes in her 60s, and she says, hey, you can come back at any age you want to. So she's setting her own rules, and every time she comes back, it's in a different fabulous outfit because she was kind of a diva, a fashionista, an actress, and so she, again, I love what you said there because, yeah, we set our rules, but we stay by our rules. And I even set it up that where her clothing was or some items of hers were, that's where she could appear. If there was something, it was in her house, in the museum, in someone else's place, but that she couldn't just pop out anywhere.
I love it.
And I found myself doing that at first is getting real loosey-goosey with the ghost element. And my critique partners were very vicious. I'm so grateful. But they're like, what, you got to build your world and you got to stick with it. I mean, you can create it, but you got to stick with it. And so that was a challenge. And then the other thing that for research purposes, I wanted to look into, you've heard about full moons and crazy things that happen under the full moon. So I got thinking, what about blue moons? So I did some, not really heavy duty research, but some fun, lighthearted research. And I did find a case back, I think it was 2012, where there was a double murder under a blue moon. And so I did pull from some of that. I tried to disguise it. And in my book, there's, the original person that was accused of that murder was tied to Wiccan. And so in the town, they went off on a witch hunt. It's basically, and my book, was trying to make a little point that we're not always what we appear. We make all these judgments and we don't know what we're always dealing with. And so I really wanted to explore the human spirit and how we it was during COVID, it was during the election. I wanted to just say, whoa, people, let's slow down and look at life and talk to each other and get real. So my research was trying to be real and honest to people that I was bringing in and not make them into caricatures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this reminds me that ghosts and the paranormal function on different levels for us. You know, on the one hand, we've got the plot tangible level of there's a ghost in a house, and if Jess can't deal with it, she's going to lose her house. But then there's the metaphorical level, the psychological level, the spiritual level, even like with the case of those murders Jan was describing, the socio and political level of what's happening. So I'd love to hear more about how your ghosts function in your stories and how many levels you've discovered as you've written them. Paulette, I'm going to
go
pick
since
on you.
I've always got something to say. Well, that's an interesting question, because in my first novel, with a ghost, the ghost is the late husband. So in a way, he functions as he would have in life, and it's concurrent. You know, he hasn't aged. That's the one thing. She finds herself sucking her stomach in case she looks, not quite as fit as she used to when he was alive. But in my second book, my ghost is from 1870 something. He's 35, and he's irritable. He's irritable. He doesn't understand anything about modern things. He's horrified that he can see the protagonist's knees from time to time when she's wearing skimpy vestments only suitable for the boudoir. But of course, he stands in a way, and I hadn't thought of this until you asked that question, he stands in a way for all those guys that are still out there thinking that way, in a way. He will be redeemed, I think, by the end of the book. But because he's on a quest to find his dead wife, he lost track of her in the afterlife. And so, but that is an interesting question. How much do our ghosts reflect either what's going on in the world around us, or whether they're just simply unique? I mean, Cleopatra, if you had Cleopatra as a ghost, she probably couldn't really stand in for anything these days, maybe, but who knows?
Mm-hmm. Paulette, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. So, in each of my books, the ghosts have a different function, but in The Devil and Mrs. Davenport, they function as kind of a metaphor for Loretta's feeling othered and not really feeling like she fits in, kind of like what Jan was alluding to with society. And we're both children of the South, it sounds like, and religion is very complicated in the South sometimes. And Loretta is a member of a very fundamentalist church. And so when she has these things manifest, they're called into question as whether or not they're evil. But what Loretta finds is a sense of purpose with these ghosts, and she feels a communion with these ghosts, and she feels like she's found her calling by learning how to communicate with the dead and be able to help them in their journey in the afterlife, and also with justice and such. In my next book, The Artist of Blackberry Grange, the ghosts function more as a conduit or a tether to the past and to my character with dementia's memory. And so these ghosts work as a way for my main character, who is this character with dementia's great niece, to understand her aunt a little bit more deeply and to see her as a younger person. And the core message of that novel is that even when our brains and our bodies begin to betray us with age, who we are, our essence, our spirit remains the same. And so the ghosts and the past help to demonstrate that. So I think it just depends on the book and what my purpose and what my core message is meant to be with how I structure my ghosts. And we kind of touched on, like, you have to know your world and such. I think Gabi was talking about that. And it's not too different as an author with fantasy writers constructing a magic system. So the supernatural, as long as we know our rules, they'll come across to the reader. And so I think spending some time getting to know what your rules are for your supernatural world is really important too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
It's an interesting conversation. It's making me think in different ways, in different depths about my ghosts. And all of mine are very tethered to the relationships. As I said, they're seeking redemption. So you have in Divine Vintage, Phoebe from 1913, her husband, this is for a century, it's been thought that he murdered her. And so she has a message to tell. And that's the gist of that. And then Tess is that conduit in the present for Phoebe to try to, get her message across without giving spoilers, of course. And and then in the second book, Divinely Dramatic, set in a theater, and you have a ghost. She died in the theater. It was a tragedy there. Now, was it an accident or was it, you don't know for sure. But she again has a message to share through Marcy, the secondary character, and you only see her as an aura. I mean, Tess is seeing visions. She can see Phoebe. All Marcy's getting is this aura that wants something done. And then when you go to book 3, you've got their friend Justine. They're all standalones, but they're all friends, like the Charmed sisters. And, here's Liza, the full-fledged ghost, and she had never told her son who his famous father was. And there's a definite regret with that now in her afterlife. So, they're all striving to make these connections and bring a closure. And it's interesting because when you talk about levels, at the end of my books, my ghosts are all at rest,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably in a lot of ghost stories, when we think about it, that people do end up, the ghosts accomplish. I don't know if that's true in real life. They may just hang around for eons, but that they accomplish what they were waiting to accomplish. And then, they go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jan, what about you? Do you want to say anything more about the levels and how your ghosts function in your story?
Yes, I would say the primary ghosts in the story, and there are a number of them, are from maybe 2012 to 2020. So they were fairly current, and they all had different stories. But interspersed with, because Marnie, my main character Marnie, is writing this fictional, not fictional, but the oral history of the ghost lore of the little town she's in. I intersperse a walking ghost tour, and so they stop at the old mill, and you get a story of some of the ghosts working back in the mill where they may be, the industrial age and the machines, there were bad accidents. So there's some of that to think about. And then at the old bridge, there were the history of lynchings. So I write with a sense of humor and lightness and hope, but I also try to bring in some elements to get people thinking and remember or remind us all that we're connected and that we need to learn from our histories. And, especially now, as I'm looking at the next one I'm going to write, I got to be careful, but we got to be careful that we don't repeat our histories. Very
Mm-hmm.
much.
So true. So true. Yeah. My ghosts are, because they're ghost story murder mysteries, my ghosts are victims of murders. And so there's that element to it, and just the reluctant psychic amateur detective has to solve the murder to help the ghost. So let's talk about our ghost missions, because none of us have hauntings that just exist because there's a ghost, there's an energy imprint or something. I mean, you might, but then we also have specific ghosts who are characters who want or need something or have a mission. So why does that matter to our stories? Why not just have, a poltergeist or something?
I don't know that just having I don't know
Yeah.
that just having just a random ghost. I mean, if you're doing pure horror, maybe, and you just want to scare the pants off somebody, maybe just having a really, scary random ghost to come in and keep people on edge the whole time. Maybe that would be something that would work. But it sounds like with all of us, we were kind of operating on that, similar level that that's not what we're looking to do. We're looking to work those ghosts through their issues, and they also help the people in their lives. I think probably all the people, the real current day people in our lives, especially I know with yours, Gabi, for one, that they're growing and changing from it, and so in Paulette's that they don't come out of this the same. Of course, after you've dealt with a ghost and this kind of a situation, those people are going to be very changed for the rest of their life.
Well, I think that's right. I think the relationship between the present or whatever, the character who's still alive and the ghost is something that's quite fascinating, really, because in many ways it's like a relationship with the person who's alive, except that, there's not necessarily a happy ending unless you die too. So how do you get around that? And because some of these, in my books anyway, they get quite attached to each other, but there's they need help from each other. That's what happens in my books. They both need to learn something from each other. But it's not easy to get that balance right. But I do think it's about the relationship between the ghost and the other protagonist. And that's how I see it, I think. Now that you've asked me, I didn't think of it before, but I do think that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
They need each other, right? I keep cutting off. I'm so sorry. I agree that the protagonist needs the ghost needs the protagonist. That's sort of how mine. And in fact, I think, Paulette, you were saying how your character needed almost a sense of purpose. And I think my main character, Marnie, who's at that crossroads, she has to face her fears. And so the ghosts are metaphorical as well as real. She obviously has other fears she needs to face, but helping solve the mystery is very much to her, benefits. It's a way that she grows. It makes it women's fiction. But there's 3 murders under 2 blue moons in one small town, and they are all connected. And Marnie's job is to figure out how and survive.
That's a good goal. Yeah. Paulette, what were you starting to say?
Just kind of agreeing with Jan and with Sandy and Gabi and what they've already said. I really feel like the ghosts have some kind of tie to the protagonist in some way. Either they're helping them grow. In The Devil and Mrs. Davenport, the ghost does have a purpose for communicate. The main ghost has a purpose with communicating with Loretta, but it also shines a light on Loretta's marriage and how broken her marriage is and how she has to learn how to stand on her own 2 feet and be strong. And in my next one, it's more about love. Like one of the ghosts in particular is very concerned with this great aunt with dementia who is still alive and is very concerned about her and wants her to feel a sense of closure before her life ends. And so that's why she's so invested in appearing to my protagonist and getting my protagonist's attention, is because she wants to activate my protagonist into helping her spread this message to her great aunt. So it's kind of a complex haunting. That one is definitely more of that book made my head hurt to write, to be quite honest. But sometimes the ghosts are more straightforward in what they want. But I think there's always that sense of justice. There's that sense of closure. There's that sense of connection that needs, at least for my work, I feel like needs to come through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think the closure idea, whether the ghost, goes to the light or whatever that ending looks like, is a key part of these stories, and that distinguishes this kind of character-driven ghost story from horror, as Sandy was saying, about like why have a ghost versus just a poltergeist or something. So what about, sounds like all of our ghosts were good people, right? And they're here with the mission, solve my murder, help my aunt, etc. But the hauntings and the shape they take through the story and the way they affect the protagonist, where do you fall between like totally benign, maybe even sweet or romantic or romanticized, to creepy, scary, gothic, dark? There's a pretty big spectrum there. So let's get into where we fall and why. Everyone's looking thoughtful here. So.
I think mine are all pretty, they range on the sweeter side. They are not, they're not scary, somewhat spooky maybe. I think a ghost is always is a little spooky, but and each of my stories is different in the series, but there were people who have said that Divine Vintage has more of that suspense feel because it truly is more of a murder mystery. You see the 1913 suspects arising and all that. So it's got a little bit of a darker edge to it that way than the other two books do. But I would say that mine would definitely be categorized as not scary. I mean, they're not hallmarked by stretch. They have a little spice level to them too in the romances. So they're not going to go quite down that but they're not going to be something that keeps someone up at night and going, "Ooh, I don't want to turn the light off now."
Mm-hmm.
I want to actually ask you, Alida, something apropos of that, because I don't know about the rest of you, but in my books, the ghosts, once they've solved the issue that they're with, they do disappear. And when I write those scenes, I always make myself cry. So now in your case, I don't know whether other people feel the same way. One gets attached to these benign ghosts, and but with yours, they're murder victims. So do they disappear, and do you feel sad when, as you're writing them reaching the light, as you said? Do you?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's such a good question. I feel deeply for them while we're going through this journey together, while Jess, the protagonist, is discovering what happened to them. And I do dual storylines. So she's a single POV protagonist, but then my ghost gets a point of view, and sporadically my villain gets a point of view, because it's not a who done it, it's a how done it, how and why done it, because I want to kind of get into the psychology of that person. And in the first book, in Murder in Skog Hall, it's a Vietnam veteran who's caught up in a severely traumatic PTSD flashback, and that's no secret. It's in the prologue, right? So you could see that in the sample. And so then, kind of like Jan was saying about Secrets of the Blue Moon and being in that 2020 time period and everything that was happening, giving him a point of view without letting it affect the reveals in the plot was a way of saying, okay, is he the bad guy? Or is the government that drafted him the bad guy? Is war really the villain, the antagonistic force behind this. And so, in that sense, I feel deeply for these characters and what they've gone through their death process. And then at the end, because that stuff is pretty awful, I'm really happy for them that their murder is solved and they can be at peace. But I've got a little ghost who's a child who died during the influenza pandemic in 1918, who was sort of a surprise readers of the first book. So this is a re-release, a relaunch, a second edition, but readers really liked her. So I'm like, oh, I guess she's sticking around. So she's kind of like the familiar ghost that gets to stick around, that doesn't have to pass over. So did that answer the question, or did I go down a rabbit hole?
No, it was great. It was great.
Thank
I don't
you.
know. Do Paulette and Jan, do you feel sad when you have to let your ghosts go back to whence they came, shall we say?
Yeah, I do feel a little bit of bittersweet nostalgia, but I like having that closure. And I'm such a forward-thinking writer that by the time my book comes out, I'm already moving on to the next one. But those characters I do care about them, and I care about the ghosts, and also, they're human compatriots and how they function in that world that I've created. And you touched on something very profound, Alida, about unhealed trauma, and that's definitely a theme in my work, and a big driving force behind what my characters decide to do, either with the supernatural or in their own lives. And as far as like whether my ghosts are scary, I do have some scary ghosts, and especially in my next book, the antagonistic ghost is scary. But again, we have an unhealed trauma situation. And so why is he so angry, and why is he acting this way? So the character has to figure that out. That's the mystery that my main character has to figure out. But most of my ghosts are benign, benevolent, who are either residual hauntings tied to whatever happened to them, or they're trying to communicate something to the living. So I like my Gothic fiction to be a little bit cozy, but just scary enough that you might want to leave the lights on, and it might not be the last thing you want to read before you go to bed. So
yes. I'm right there with you. Yeah. Jan, what about you? What are your ghosts' mission, and do you get sad when their time is done?
I don't think I get as sad as relieved, or happy is not the right word, but they all do. I do have a couple that are not very nice, and they all kind of come to get what they deserve, I believe. But so I don't feel as sad. I miss them. There are some that I'm much more fond of than others, and some that I would love to sit down and have a glass of wine with, actually, and talk. But I, I I like to see their journey. I'm content to see their journey go where it needs to go.
Mm-hmm. So, Paulette, you said that writing that one novel made your head hurt. And I want to go there. When I was writing my story, I call it a ghost story murder mystery because it really is both. And I feel like if I look back at what I was reading growing up, a big inspiration for me is the mystery genre. It's Sherlock Holmes, and it's, all of Agatha Christie's detectives and such. And I love that idea of the puzzle and piecing it together, especially as the writer. It's fun as the reader to try to piece it together as you go through it. But then as the writer, you're building it with all of that in mind. But then it's also the ghost story. So what inspired each of you to go down this path, the ghost story path, the paranormal path? And what about this genre is challenging? Fun challenging or hard challenging? Let's go there.
I think the hardest thing for me with anything paranormal that I write is making it believable enough that the reader can suspend their disbelief temporarily. And I do want my books to be a little bit on the scary side. So it's building that anticipatory dread that the horror side of me wants to build, but the mystery lover side of me also wants to build the mystery. And the next one has time slips in it. So that's all of that together made my head hurt because it's very complex to weave all of those different things together in a way that also doesn't tire your reader, because you definitely don't want to do that either. You want your reader to come to your books and feel entertained and relaxed and engaged, and not feel like they have to solve a math problem. So, so I think that's always the challenge for me, is tying all of those elements in and keeping the pacing solid and keeping the pacing taut enough that the reader can continue to suspend their disbelief and want to keep reading.
Yeah. Pacing is always in any book, but especially in the, these kind of books, you want to just keep bringing people forward. And, I lost my point of what I was going to say there. Oh, I know. I was going to say what's really was difficult for me. Here, you could do an edit there. Well, it was the most difficult. I make it most difficult on myself because I'm a pantser. And as much as I'm a super detailed person in real life, I sit down to write a book and I cannot outline and just follow an outline. I cannot do it. It just has to come out. And so, with these books, the ghost was just kind of natural. For some reason, it just have that fascination with it. And the ghost became very natural. But as you said, Alida, with mystery, I love mysteries too. And I realized, well, Divine Vintage is not a true mystery, that Tess saw who done it, right at the beginning. So it was more trying to prove it. And I said to myself, why did I do that? Because I would prefer to read a mystery. So I went back in and made it very hard on myself and built the mystery in all the editing process we all do. And then I had to come up with additional suspects, and I kept building out Phoebe. 1913, she's the murder victim. And I kept building out her story more and just falling in love with her and her story. But I really just wanted to make it a mystery. And it was so fun to do that. And I'm like, as if I couldn't do that before. And each of my books, I seem to do that, is come up with this brainstorm. And I go, I have to do this, but it means doing all this changing. So any difficulty really comes from how I do the process.
I had a similar experience, actually, because I started writing my second novel when I published this one. And as I started getting feedback from readers, I found that they really loved the ghost character, who is not at all the main character in that book. Not at all. And so I had started writing it. This one takes place in a bookshop. And so I was in a little town that I thought I'd invented. Turned out to be a real town. Never mind. But then I thought I'd started writing the next book, which takes place in a library and so on and so forth. And I was getting kind of like with it. And when I started getting feedback about the ghost, I thought, well, maybe what this book needs is a ghost. But if you've ever tried to do this, like, what is it called? Reverse engineering? When you try to add a character in and keep the two plots going and get them talking to each and so on and so forth, it was incredibly difficult. And next time, I think I will start with the ghost. What's more, he took over the plot. So he's now the main character. He's just all over the place. And I never believed that before, when authors would say, well, the characters speak to me, and then I know what they're doing. I was always like, yeah, right. But they do. Turns out they do. Those ghosts are really quite determined.
They are, Jan.
What was your question, Alida?
So, what was challenging about writing this paranormal story with, what is it? It's three murders, 2 blue moons, and 1 small town, right?
Okay. And I was so engrossed in what all you were saying, and Gabby, and I was like, oh, what's the question? Um, I I don't know. I always loved mystery. It's like my comfort read. And when, I'm trying to be well read and read all different kinds of things, but when I really need to, I go back to mystery. Um, and the ghosts, I, I guess partly I'll go back to the mystery. For a while, I really struggled with myself. One Christmas, my husband got me a romance book, and I read it. And, of course, it makes you more romantic. So, but I said, next time, please get me a hack 'em up book. But it started to bother me, like, what's wrong with me? And then I went to a lot of Sisters in Crime meetings and listened to a lot of the authors. And really, it's the great morality play is what we're looking at. And I do think I have a sense not of a preachy right or wrong, but I think an inside right or wrong, good versus evil. And I think they all exist. But, I think that's where my Pollyanna comes out. I think there's more good than bad, even with our ghosts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I love what you just said there and the idea of the great morality play, and I think that's another defining quality of these novels is that it isn't just a pure mystery in the sense of solve a riddle, put the pieces together, brain teaser type of mystery. And it's not horror in the sense of fright for the sake of being frightened. There's a lot going on with our characters and their lives and the worlds we've built. And because of the ghosts, the past as well as the present, and how these things play together in our lives and in our realities.
Oh, the ghosts aren't necessarily, in my books, they're not all perfectly pure. It's
No.
not like there's things that they've done, and that's why they're seeking this redemption. As I said, the mother in The Ghostly Diva, she now regrets that she shielded this famous man from telling her son. There's a big regret. And she did have, some, even though she was trying to do her best by the son, in her dual timeline point of view, she, was making mistakes. And in Divinely Dramatic, the second book set at a theater, this girl she's got jealousy going on with her situation, and it leads to tragedy. And so it's not like there's those characters are just squeaky clean and pure. I mean, our ghosts, just like all characters, they have flaws too. And as Paulette said, we want to know them. We've got to know them as well as we know our current day people as well. Everyone has to be well fleshed out for the readers to be able to empathize and care.
Right.
Care about these ghosts at all, or care about the protagonist wanting to solve it. Otherwise, we're going to toss our book back on the pile.
Yes. Oh, so true. Yeah. And I don't think maybe morality play isn't the best word, maybe just drama, in the classic sense of the word drama, the way life plays out with good and evil and right and wrong and the decisions we make and all of the repercussions that send ripples out throughout not only our lives, but the lives of everyone we touch. Yeah. So pacing and suspense have both come up in our conversation. Thoughts about some, hardcore craft here. How do you manage pacing and suspense as you're writing these stories?
Every scene has to count. We know that. We can't just throw in fluffy scenes just because, they're pretty. And I think the more that we learn, and I'm sure all of us have studied and learned and worked to improve our craft. And if you take like my first book, for instance, and you all may feel the same way, and you get to the third one, there's an improvement. There's an improvement in the writing because, I have been paying attention and reading other people and trying to learn from that. So, that's the journey that we're on, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I agree. Make every scene count. Other
And let
thoughts?
bad things happen to the characters you like. I mean, I think that's one of the hardest things sometimes. I'm getting a little too good at it sometimes. But, you know, yes, every scene has to count and it has to constantly build. And it's a challenge to do that. But I love to pants, but I end up with a big book that has like 3 different storylines. And so I really am trying to do more structure work now, like Save the Cat writes a novel. I've done Lisa Cron's story. I love that because she recommends thinking where you want to start and having yourself draft 3 scenes that happen leading up to that. And I love doing that because it made me think like the character, like, why am I doing this? I found it much more valuable than going through and picking out the character's favorite song or doing one of those exercises about, what's your character. But making it an entertaining story that has some meaning, but that keeps people wanting to read. That's what I aim for. And that is a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For me, suspense is all about knowing when to plant the seed and knowing when it needs to bloom for the greatest effect, and then growing that sprout appropriately along the way. And with the mystery and paranormal aspect, there's so much that you can't give away, like no moment before it's time. Right. So I want the reader to be asking a particular question about the story and about what could be coming. And I want them every time they encounter this little sprout, I want the intensity of the question they're asking to mount in their mind so that when the reveal comes and they understand what this thing is all about, when that question is answered, it's rewarding, it's done its job.
You're so poetic how you put things. I like that.
I just teach craft a lot.
It made sense.
Thank you. Yeah. What else do we want to say about ghost stories? And Halloween. This episode is coming out for Halloween. Do any of you have fun launches or events or offers coming up?
Well, let's see. Thursday, I actually have a pilot. We're doing a walking tour, story walk on my book, Divine Vintage. And a friend who creates these tours in Lower Michigan had read my book and really enjoyed it. And she said, would you like to build one around your book? Because it's set in a town in my county. And I said, oh, absolutely. Because I do a lot of local presentations and book clubs. So we've got all these local partners that we pull together. And we're going to go kind of do a little pilot of it and work out, get their buy-in more, work out the bugs, and then prepare in spring to actually do a walking event around it. So I'm excited about that. It's something different and cool because I'm an actress, have done theater for too many years to mention that, I really love the idea of doing something different with my books. And, it's going to be the ghostliness. We start in the mansion, the haunted mansion, where the book is set, is inspired by a real beautiful mansion in the town. So that's where we're going to kick it off.
Oh, I love
Sandy,
that.
tell me, are you going to wear some of your wonderful vintage clothes for the tour?
Oh, I always will. Anytime I do a presentation, I am always wearing vintage. I mean, that's my brand. That's the one fun thing I have.
It's great.
Good.
Yeah. And where are you in case anyone, wants to get on that
Northwest
walking
Indiana.
tour? Northwest
Yes,
Indiana.
I'm in Northwest Indiana,
Okay.
about an hour out of Chicago.
Okay. All right. That's not bad. People can drive there.
Mhm.
We're anticipating people may come in, from an hour or so, groups of people that want to have something fun to do in a downtown. We have a lakefront, Lake Michigan's there.
Mm, very cool. That's exciting. I love that.
You can all come. You can all do it.
All right. Jan, do you have any events coming up that you would like our listeners to hear about?
I am working with a couple neighborhoods that want to do some book clubs, and I'm excited about that. And I'm also looking at visiting a local vineyard to do the weekend of Halloween, to do just a maybe a women's getaway before they're celebrating their kids' stuff, to come out and have a glass of wine and buy a book if they're so inclined. So those are the two big ones that I have right around the corner.
That's great. What mom doesn't want to come out, hang out with other moms, have a glass of wine and a good book?
Mhm.
Right?
Right.
Yep. Yes. All right. Paulette, what about you?
I love being a guest at book clubs. So, Jan, I am right in line with you there. But right now, the big thing I'm doing for Halloween is I have a series ongoing on Instagram Live right now that I'm hosting my fellow authors who write Gothic, mystery, horror fiction. And so we're doing a whole series of spooky season IG lives. And those are available on my Instagram at P. Kennedy Writes. And tonight I'm hosting my friend Constance Sayers. And we just have a really great lineup. And those will all be available to view later as well if you can't see them, catch them live. But I do often host authors on my Instagram Live as a matter of course for interviews and such. And that's something that I have ongoing.
Excellent. Gabi, your turn.
I've got an author fair coming up. Now, it's actually on November 2nd, but it's the Indie Author Day, run by an organization called the Indie Author Project, which is organized by librarians and is celebrated all over the country. If you've got a library that does it, lucky you. So I do have near me. And I happened to win the Indie Author Award from that organization. Last year, I guess I sent it in last year and I won it this year, if you see what I mean. So they like me to come and be there to do that. And I love, one of the reasons I love these things is I love meeting readers. I bet other people do too. Not just because they come up and say, this is lovely, or I really enjoyed it, but just because I like to know that real people actually read it, because you send your book out into the world and then it's kind of gone. Yeah, your mom read it, but really, you want to know that people you don't know read it and hopefully liked it. So that's one of the reasons I love to do this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I have Murder for Skog Hall is available for pre-order on Amazon right now, and the book drops on Halloween on October 31st, just in time. So yeah, that's my big event. Drop in the book. So
Fine.
everybody can go to storyworkspodcast.com. Really simple URL. Grab this episode show notes and you will see all of our guests' headshot, book cover, and link. So make sure you go there, click on their links, visit their websites, check out all of the upcoming events, and attend as many as you can. So thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been so much fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
My newsletter, A Room Full of Books and Pencils, is growing every week with new reflections, writing tips, and transcripts of the podcast. It's also where I make announcements about things like upcoming writing workshops and coaching sessions. Check out A Room Full of Books and Pencils at booksandpencils.substack.com. Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.